We trust them with our bodies, our health, our lives. But what do we really know about our doctors?
And nobody wants to believe their doctor would do anything bad, right?
They don't want to believe that. I don't want to believe that.
Can we be sure that the bad ones
I went home feeling very violated.
will be held accountable?
How can you kill somebody and then go practice still?
Our research uncovered more than 100 cases where doctors were investigated for serious misconduct, but the public has no easy way to learn the details, allowing physicians who harmed or abused their patients to continue practicing.
You kidding me?
It's frightening.
Should this doctor be practicing medicine?
No.
At the top, it's the medical profession that are allowing this to happen.
It's a nationwide system that is supposed to protect patients.
If you want to see a doctor's disciplinary file, you can't find it. They won't disclose it.
But instead,
there's a tendency to protect those doctors.
it often leaves the sick and vulnerable in the dark. My name is Ashley Korslin, and I'm an investigative reporter at KGW in Portland, Oregon. In the fall of 2022, I was assigned to cover a story involving a well-known local doctor whose patients accused him of sexual abuse. Many of the alleged victims came to him for OBGYN care.
And then Farley just put his ungloved hand inside my vagina, and then I yelled, "Ouch."
Nearly 130 women and girls joined a lawsuit accusing Dr. David Farley of sexually abusing them during exams. Prosecutors investigated and brought 23 of those cases before a grand jury, hoping to criminally charge Dr. Farley. The lawsuit is still pending, but the grand jury declined to indict Farley on criminal charges, meaning they didn't think there was enough evidence to prove the allegations beyond a reasonable doubt. This made me wonder how many doctors had been accused of serious misconduct, yet evaded accountability. That question set in motion a massive research project where our team of journalists reviewed thousands of pages of medical board documents, lawsuits, police reports, and medical records. We interviewed more than 36 patients, lawmakers, and attorneys across Oregon, California, and Washington, and heard firsthand accounts from the people whose lives were forever changed by physician misconduct. We found cases where doctors continued practicing for years after patients first complained about them. Cases like Dr. Mark LaRue, who was charged with second-degree rape 14 years after 3 patients reported that he touched them inappropriately. We found cases like Dr. Christopher Baldwin, who left Oregon after 8 women accused him of sexual misconduct. He now has an active medical license in Arizona, where a state database shows no indication of past investigations. We also analyzed data from the Oregon Medical Board and found that of the 144 doctors disciplined in the state between 2012 and 2022, 28 of them went on to practice medicine in another state. One of them is Dr. Bhanoo Sharma, who moved from state to state following multiple medical board investigations. And Dr. Sharma is still actively practicing, despite being reprimanded for the deaths of 2 patients.
Flight 277, local time.
I tracked down the daughter of one of those 2 women. We traveled to San Francisco to meet her. It was the first time Sonia Rivera had spoken to anyone outside her family about what happened to her mother, Pauletta Cameron.
I didn't know my mom was having surgery.
In 2012, Pauletta opted to get liposuction ahead of a family reunion.
And that's me and my mom.
Had she known, Sonia would have talked her out of it. That's because Pauletta had a history of hypertension, cerebral aneurysms, and potential congestive heart failure. In May of 2012, Dr. Sharma approved Pauletta for liposuction at a Sono Bello clinic in Portland. According to medical board records, he didn't order any preoperative diagnostic testing, like an electrocardiogram.
A poor and risky candidate, would you say, overall for surgery? She never should have had the surgery.
This is Dr. Juliana Hansen, professor and chief of plastic and reconstructive surgery at Oregon Health and Science University in Portland. We asked Dr. Hansen to review Pauletta's medical file. She has no connection to Pauletta's case or Dr. Sharma.
Before the surgery started, her oxygenation levels were documented to have an oxygen saturation of 80%. That is extremely low.
Court records show that during the 66-minute procedure, Pauletta's blood pressure and oxygen saturation dropped even lower, but Dr. Sharma continued operating. After the surgery, Pauletta was still hypotensive, and her oxygen level was critically depressed, levels too low to be safely discharged. According to court records, a nurse notified Dr. Sharma twice about the concerning vitals, but he signed off on her release. And after only 18 minutes in post-operative recovery, Pauletta was sent home with her husband, Scott Cameron. Court records would later reveal that no one had informed Scott about his wife's dangerous condition. Hours later, Pauletta collapsed at home and was rushed by ambulance to a hospital. She was admitted to the ICU.
I received a phone call from my stepfather, Scott, saying, "Your mom's in the hospital and it doesn't look good."
Sonia took the first flight she could from San Francisco to Portland. Her most vivid memory is seeing her mother hooked up to a ventilator.
And when I turned and looked at her, I was like, oh my God. And that's when my knees kind of buckled and I stumbled and the nurses caught me.
Pauletta was in a coma for 3 days. That's when Sonia had to make the difficult choice.
And then she took a very deep breath.
To remove her mother from life support.
And she guessed it flatlined on the screen. And that was it. It was like my whole world was gone.
An autopsy showed Pauletta had suffered cardiac arrest and congestive heart failure, along with acute respiratory failure and an anoxic brain injury. In other words, no oxygen was getting to her brain. The autopsy listed a traumatic bowel injury as her cause of death. A $13 million lawsuit filed on behalf of the family accused Dr. Sharma of perforating Pauletta's bowel during the surgery.
That's an error, a technical error, and in this case we think led to some very severe problems.
The lawsuit triggered an investigation by the Oregon Medical Board. Investigators found Dr. Sharma engaged in conduct that constituted unprofessional or dishonorable conduct and gross or repeated acts of negligence. A report stated he unnecessarily placed Pauletta's safety in jeopardy by conducting this elective procedure and failed to properly assess Pauletta's post-op condition.
One needs to recognize a patient who's in distress. And when your oxygen levels are low after surgery, that patient should never be discharged to their home. She needed basic medical care that should have been recognized by any surgeon.
Had she had that medical care, do you believe her death could have been prevented?
Absolutely.
In a letter to health officials, Dr. Sharma defended his care of Pauletta Cameron. He stated he performed a complete physical exam before the surgery and believed Pauletta was a suitable candidate for the procedure. He also argued that he followed his clinic's proper procedures for discharging a patient and that Pauletta was alert and talking when she left. While looking into Pauletta's case, records show medical board investigators discovered 5 additional patients in Oregon who had to receive emergency medical care after cosmetic procedures with Dr. Sharma. In 2015, nearly 3 years after Pauletta's death, the Oregon Medical Board revoked Dr. Sharma's license, but the medical board later reversed course for reasons it won't disclose. Instead, the board placed conditions on his license, like imposing a fine and requiring him to complete continuing education. At some point, he left Oregon and began operating in Illinois, where he also had a medical license. And in 2016, 4 years after Pauletta's death, tragedy struck again for one of Dr. Sharma's patients. A 41-year-old woman died during a lipoplasty procedure in Hazel Crest, Illinois. Medical board investigators determined Dr. Sharma's deficient injection technique punctured muscle and gluteal veins and permitted fat to enter the bloodstream and become trapped in the lungs. Investigators then discovered 3 additional patients in Illinois who had to receive emergency medical care following procedures with Dr. Sharma. The Illinois Medical Board investigators declared him an immediate danger to the health and safety of the public. Still, the board chose not to revoke his license. In fact, after the second woman's death, it took 5 years for the Illinois Medical Board to suspend Dr. Sharma's license. The suspension was only for 18 months. Around the same time, Dr. Sharma surrendered his Oregon license. Despite being found to be grossly negligent in multiple cases across 2 states, Dr. Sharma still held an active medical license in one state, Indiana.
We're working late today, okay?
And as we discovered,
so we're partway through the transformation.
He's actively practicing there today.
We'll see you soon.
Some 13 years after Pauletta Cameron's death.
He needs to be stripped of this license. Why is he slipping through the cracks? Why isn't anybody going after him for what he's done?
Through a public records request, we learned the Indiana Medical Board opened an investigation in 2021 following 3 new complaints against Dr. Sharma. But there was no evidence of an investigation on the board's website until the spring of 2023. The case is pending.
Oh, here we go.
I contacted Dr. Sharma for comment.
Hey, Dr. Sharma.
He agreed to talk.
I would love to talk with you and hear your side of the story.
But almost immediately told me he would not answer any questions.
Okay, thank you.
And ended our call.
Bye. Well, here's my questions. I don't need anymore.
I spent a good 5 months investigating Dr. Sharma and piecing together the paper trail through multiple states. It was a lot of work, and ultimately, public records painted a clear picture of his troubled history. But I found cases where finding information was much more difficult, like the investigation into Dr. Christopher Baldwin, a physician accused of sexual battery. With Dr. Baldwin, the Oregon Medical Board sued KGW to keep us from getting records about his case. In 2020, 8 women sued Dr. Baldwin for sexual battery and medical negligence, court records show. 6 of them were school bus drivers in Beaverton, Oregon. They were required by their employer to undergo physical exams to maintain their commercial driver's licenses. Dr. Baldwin performed those exams. In their lawsuit, the women alleged between 2015 and 2020, Dr. Baldwin peered down their shirts during exams and stared at their breasts without legitimate medical reason. 3 of the women claimed Dr. Baldwin touched their breasts or genital area. Dr. Baldwin didn't respond to our request for an interview, but he did talk about the allegations during a deposition as part of the lawsuit. He denied any sexual misconduct, saying, quote, "I was not breathing heavily, but since she was wearing such a skimpy outfit, some things probably could have been semi-excited." It appears Dr. Baldwin settled the lawsuit confidentially. Then his medical license in Oregon went on inactive status. We discovered that he left the state and received a medical license in Arizona in 2022. Neither the Arizona nor Oregon Medical Board websites reflect evidence of any disciplinary action or the lawsuit. But through our reporting, we learned that before leaving Oregon, Dr. Baldwin was issued a letter of concern by the Oregon Medical Board. We filed a public records request to get a copy of that letter, but the board denied us, arguing the letter is confidential. We appealed to the Oregon Attorney General's office, which agreed the letter of concern is indeed a public record. It ordered the medical board to turn it over. Instead, the Oregon Medical Board sued KGW, asking a state judge to rule the letter of concern should remain private. As of now, that legal fight continues. Dr. Baldwin's case serves as an example of how medical and health professional boards can reach closed-door resolutions with doctors that the public will never learn about. It also shows how far the Oregon Medical Board will go to keep parts of its process secret.
The big thing about the medical board is they want the complete power to license and to discipline doctors, and that makes there's strong arguments for that, but the price of that should be transparency. Mm-hmm. We need to know what they're doing.
Right.
In the case of chiropractor Dr. Mark LaRue, patients accused him of sexual misconduct, yet he continued to practice for nearly 15 years before finally being arrested.
I couldn't believe that I could leave a doctor's office feeling so violated.
Stephanie LeCount was one of the first women to report Dr. LaRue to the Washington Department of Health. In 2004, she wrote a detailed letter of what she says she experienced during her adjustment.
I believe I wrote in the letter a lot about his fondling, about his moving my arms and things around so that they could touch his genitals, and about how invasive he was about touching my breasts.
At the time of her complaint, Stephanie wasn't aware that another woman had filed a similar complaint against Dr. LaRue the year before. In fact, Stephanie was one of 3 women who reported him to state health officials between 2003 and 2004, yet no action was taken against his license, according to Department of Health records. Police even opened a criminal investigation, which ended with prosecutors declining to pursue the case. Notes in a police report show a prosecutor said it's hard to prove cases where a doctor touches a patient, and called the allegations against LaRue a gray area.
A gray area to me says, we don't believe you. Mm-hmm. So it really made me saddened for the other women, because if he could do that to me and they weren't going to even take any action or try to stop it then, I knew at that point there was going to be other women that were going to come forward eventually.
And there were. In 2017, nearly 15 years after the first complaint against Dr. LaRue, police opened a new investigation after 2 more women came forward alleging sexual abuse. Police records show a 22-year-old reported that during her treatment, Dr. LaRue inserted his finger into her vagina without consent.
There was some allegations from a client of yours of inappropriate sexual contact.
Here he is, speaking with a detective in 2017.
You put pressure on one part of the leg, and for it to be comfortable, you have to hold it with your hand on the other side of the leg. But I don't think I was paying attention with this, and I went right into her vaginal area with my fingers. That was very stupid of me to let that happen.
The second victim who came forward that same year told investigators that LaRue touched his semi-erect penis to her hands during an adjustment.
Do you recall any of that time? I imagine you would know if somebody's hand touched your penis area.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
During the criminal investigation, at least 12 additional patients shared similar experiences with Dr. LaRue, according to police records.
And at one point I could feel his genital area like against my shoulder, and I thought.
Women like Christina Suarez.
It was kind of confusing in my head, because I'm like, well, maybe it's just me being oversensitive, maybe he's a professional.
She says her children were sitting in the waiting room when Dr. LaRue touched her inappropriately during 2 different exams. Christina was too ashamed to report it out of fear no one would believe her word against her doctors.
So one, if I say something, what's going to happen right here in front of my kids? Is it a crime, what he did? And how is this going to play out?
Christina feels that had state health officials taken the original 3 allegations seriously in 2003 and 4, none of the other women would have been victimized.
And when things are reported, they should not be sloughed off. They should be investigated. And accountability is important.
In January of 2023,
Then how do you plead? I plead guilty.
Mark LaRue pleaded guilty to 3rd-degree rape and indecent liberties for the crimes committed in 2017. He was sentenced to 2 years and 8 months in prison.
So my word really meant nothing.
But for women like Stephanie LeCount, the statute of limitations had expired. so LaRue was never charged for those alleged crimes.
Do you feel the system failed you?
Yeah, I do.
We tried to contact Mark LaRue in prison for comment. He did not respond. These 3 doctors were just some of the many cases we uncovered during our months of research. We embarked on this project to highlight how difficult it is to learn about problematic doctors, and medical boards don't make it easy. Oftentimes, their websites don't reveal much about past discipline. It was hard enough for our team of veteran journalists to uncover the scope of the problem just in Oregon, let alone across the country. We filed dozens of records requests and spent thousands of dollars to get copies of what limited documents are publicly available. We created a spreadsheet of doctors disciplined in Oregon and cross-referenced those names with disciplinary records in other states to determine which doctors continued practicing elsewhere after getting in trouble in Oregon. At best, our research gave us a limited snapshot into a nationwide problem. The only federal database that tracks doctor misconduct is not available to the public. It's a system designed, in theory, to protect patients from doctors who move from state to state without disclosing serious discipline. Yet the National Practitioner Data Bank is only accessible to licensing boards, insurance companies, and hospitals.
We would like to see this information available to the public.
For years, advocates like Lisa McGifford with the Patient Safety Action Network have fought to make the database public to allow patients to search a doctor's name and see whether they've been disciplined in various states.
Why can't we see it?
Because federal law says we can't. And that's basically it. Congress would have to change the law that makes this information public.
So we went to a member of Congress. Oregon Senator Ron Wyden helped create the data bank 40 years ago.
Since the data bank's origination, you have been a proponent of opening that data up to the public. What are the hurdles? Why hasn't that been done?
The hurdles probably strike people as pretty obvious. A lot of the provider groups, the physician groups, are very powerful, and they have consistently opposed it.
The American Medical Association opposes making the data bank public. In a statement, the organization said the National Practitioner Data Bank is inherently flawed and lacks the accuracy and reliability that the public must be able to count on.
So what needs to happen? Does Congress need to act? Will Congress act?
I very much want to see federal malpractice reform, federal accountability, close the gaps in the data bank. It is long overdue.
There is one way to look at raw numbers from the data bank of how many disciplined doctors move to other states to practice.
The data, luckily, is very well documented.
But it requires specialized data analysis software.
Yes.
So we partnered with data analysis students at the University of Oregon.
We grouped each practitioner number into their separate group where they have their multiple offenses.
They found that between 2000 and 2023, 59 doctors had been disciplined in other states, then came to Oregon and faced new discipline. Additionally, in that same time period, 154 doctors were disciplined in Oregon, only to be disciplined later for new misconduct in another state. It's perhaps the best raw data available when it comes to understanding how many doctors are moving from state to state after facing serious discipline, but there's no way to know the full scope of the problem. Some states, though, have taken steps to increase transparency in the way they investigate and discipline doctors.
I was a member of the California State Legislature for 12 years.
Former California State Senator Jerry Hill was the chair of the Senate committee that oversaw the state's medical board. He routinely saw cases where doctors accused of egregious behavior would get probation.
So that to me was an abuse, basically, of the system because they were allowed to continue to practice. But the part that was really stunning to me, which really kind of said something had to be done, 30% of those doctors did it again. 30% of the doctors on probation recidivated. They did it again.
Hill was incensed. So in 2018, he wrote and sponsored a bill that became landmark legislation in California. The Patients' Right to Know Act requires doctors to notify their patients if they're on probation for serious misconduct. It was the first of its kind law in the country. Washington has since passed a similar law requiring doctors to disclose when they're on probation, but only for sexual misconduct. Most states, though, including Oregon, still don't have these requirements. When I started this project, I wanted to talk to as many patients as possible, but almost immediately, I began running into roadblocks. That's because in most situations, when patients sue their doctor for malpractice, negligence, or sexual misconduct, they settle confidentially out of court, meaning they're not legally allowed to share any details about what they experienced at the hands of their physician. The public will never learn about it, perpetuating a system shrouded in secrecy. I talked with 2 longtime attorneys who specialize in medical sex abuse cases.
If you agree to keep your mouth shut in order to settle a case, the public suffers enormously.
Are you able to guesstimate maybe what percentage of cases you're seeing resulting in these confidential settlements now compared to maybe 10 years ago?
I would say now I see them in 95% of my cases that
Wow.
They want a confidentiality agreement or a non-disparagement of at some point. It was much less than 50% 10 years ago.
Both attorneys are advocates for more transparency from state medical boards. They would like to see boards simplify and expand upon the way the public can access investigatory documents. No public records requests, no fees. Put it all online for free.
99.9% of doctors are great and do the right thing. That 1% is a big number of doctors that are abusing women and children. Unfortunately, the medical boards, there's a tendency to protect those doctors.
The reason is because the medical board is controlled by the medical profession.
I wanted to find a variety of perspectives for our story to understand why some doctors might value confidentiality in the discipline process and why medical boards feel it's critical to keep certain documents private. We contacted the Oregon Medical Board. The agency declined our request for an interview, but did provide a statement saying, "The Oregon Medical Board is proud of its record of upholding the agency's mission and protecting patients through consistent and decisive disciplinary actions when warranted. The board has a zero-tolerance culture for sexual misconduct." We also reached out multiple times to the Oregon Medical Association, which represents doctors in the state. No one got back to us about scheduling an interview. We've outlined many gaps and failures in the system, but we want to find solutions. We will keep pushing for answers from elected officials and government agencies, but we'd like to share with you perhaps the best resource we discovered that can help you research your doctor and whether they have a disciplinary past. It's docinfo.org. We use that site many times during our research. We also have a website where we've compiled extensive details about the cases we've uncovered, as well as other tips and resources for patients. Go to kgw.com/sickmedicine.
Begins to